This is the Recover with God podcast, where we talk about recovery from eating disorders, disordered eating, diet culture, body image, weight struggles, over-exercising, and anything related to food and body that keeps you feeling trapped. The enemy wants to distract us with these struggles, and that is why recovery with God is so important. This podcast will point you to God and the hope and freedom we have through Jesus, whether you're here for your own recovery or you want to help someone you know. So let's dive in and hear what God has to say through this episode of the Recover with God podcast. Hello and welcome to the Recover with God podcast. Jayme here, and I host this podcast because God led me to do it. And I believe he led you here today as well. On this episode, I'm chatting with Joy Mast. Joy is a speaker, teacher, writer, author, and founder of Releasity, a ministry that offers a confidential, fun, and supportive community to help Christian women find freedom from dieting and excessive eating. I'll let Joy share more about Releasity and her book, as well as her own story that led her on this journey to help other women. Hey, Joy, it's great to have you. I'm so excited to have this conversation.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share about it.
Yeah, I feel like for all of you out there who've never been on a podcast or hosted a podcast, sometimes you schedule these chats so far in advance. And I was just telling Joy, it feels like forever ago that we scheduled this call and now we're here. So just really, really happy that we're having this conversation that y'all get to hear as you're listening now. So we'll dive into my two icebreaker questions that I ask every guest on the podcast. And the first one is about zeal, because zeal is just my favorite word. I love it. It's fun to say. And my own definition of this word is living with a passionate and persistent pursuit of a purpose. I like alliteration as well. And so I like to ask all my guests, what does living with zeal look like in your life right now?
Well, I also love alliteration, so I'm glad you said that. When I love this question about zeal. Recently, I was at a Bible study where they talked about Hannah in the Old Testament being at the temple and wanting so badly to have a child. And she persisted and persisted in prayer. And then also with Jesus, with the woman, the bleeding woman who just wanted to get to him to get healed. And it made me think about my journey with binge eating and how much I pursued healing at that point in my life. At this point now, that's about 20 years ago that the journey started. And I thought, gosh, I want that same zeal for and that zeal came to me of what's going on in my life right now. And so, very honestly, I'm at the stage, I just turned 50 last month. And so I'm at that stage where a woman's body starts changing. And with that, for me personally, has come some physical pain that I've been pursuing answers for about 2 years now. And I have not arrived at the answer yet. And I just, in that Bible study this summer, I thought, I want to go after that healing with the same zeal that I went after other things in my life where I was in a situation where I knew I needed change. And so oddly, it might sound superficial, but it really is better health and less pain, and just asking God persistently to bring healing there.
Ooh, those are good examples, especially with Hannah. I never really thought about her story as her living with zeal. And, and I love this word, but that's never occurred to me. So you're teaching me something new today too. And I think that's such a real answer. I turned 41 this year and I'm starting to feel my body a little, it's not as young as it used to be, right? There are differences
Right.
in what you can accomplish and just being more kind to yourself, I think, in what you're capable of. But yeah, some of those health things just look so different now. And so I I appreciate your wisdom there for when I approach 50 as well, and just kind of having that zeal to approach any situation that might not be the most ideal, and you
Yes.
wanting those answers. So
And
yeah,
not
thank
to
you.
compromise. I have a friend who really
Mm,
called me out. She said, Joy, why are you settling? You're settling for this pain when you could be, who knows what the future holds, but I really want to cry out to God on this issue, the same way I cried out to God with the food and other things in my past. So that's zeal for me right now. There's an honest answer.
okay. Yeah, I love it. This question always brings out such unique answers, and it's beautiful. So Thank you for that. And then also I've added this question to season 2 that I'm asking guests in. So I would love to know, Joy, in your opinion or experience, what's the biggest lie that you think Christian women face today?
Well, I don't know that it is the biggest, but it's definitely one of the biggest I see in the women I work with and talk to. And it's the lie that your worth
Mm,
is related to your weight or that your worth is related to your appearance. And so I feel like we try to do a lot of work undoing that belief and reestablishing that our worth is related to what Jesus did for us on the cross 2,000 years ago in the Middle East.
Amen.
What that says about our value and righteousness. And I often observe that even if women reach that size they think they need to be in order to be worthy, there's rarely contentment or confidence there. So it's like, what's
No.
the point? So I have 2 daughters and I try to remind them that the answer is not in being a certain size or looking a certain way in life. I think
Yeah,
that's why.
that's so true. I was there. In my past, I attained that size that everyone is trying to get to, and it did not make me happy. It
Right.
actually made me less happy than I've
Right.
been in my entire life. And so it's so true, we have this idea of a goal or some finish line, right? That you're trying to get to, and it's just not what you think it is. And the
Yeah.
enemy wants us to keep pursuing that instead of pursuing Jesus and other things with zeal, as we just talked
Right.
about. So,
Right. And the
yeah,
culture, there's
yeah,
Satan, there's the culture. It's just so, it's like the fish in water doesn't realize he's in water. You're
mm,
swimming in this every day. So
yeah. It's
that's a
all
lot.
around us in the tiniest ways. And even on season 1 of my podcast, so my career, I in marketing,
Mhm.
and I did an episode on how marketing can so subtly get into your brain about diet culture and how you need to look and what you need to do and what you need to eat and what you shouldn't eat. And it can be very subtle, but it's just all around us. I mean, you walk into the grocery store, you're seeing it, even if you don't realize you are seeing it in at least one of the aisles that you walk down. So it's yeah, it's
Yes.
just it's good to be aware and to then know how you can approach it and with the truth, right?
Yes.
And have and
Yes.
be armed and ready with that. So definitely think that is at least one of the biggest for sure. I
Yes.
would
And
agree.
yeah, not to get ahead here, but I think when I talk with women about this piece, the more they become aware of all these food rules, it's
Yeah.
exciting to me when they report back, oh my gosh, my mother talks like this all the time. And I never realized my mother talked like this. I think, yes, that's right. So just the lies that
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
given.
And when it's so ingrained, like you said, like a family member or a friend or just some TV show you're watching, just you start to pay attention to how people are talking and it seems so normal and so natural, but
Mhm.
it's not truth. It's not healthy. It's just really not how God designed us to live. So
Yeah.
thank you for making people aware. And that's like probably a good segue into your
Yeah.
story. So I'd love to open it up now for you to share what is on your heart.
Yeah, so I go back to my childhood when I tell my story. I grew up overweight, overeating, love to eat. I don't think that I was aware growing up of what the messages of the culture were. I had some
Mhm.
messages from some family members about my body.
Okay.
And I find that to be a common thread among women that they overhear either you overhear messages people are saying about other people or messages are directly said about you. So grew up overweight, overeating, got into my 20s and that began the season of a lot of friends getting married and being asked to be a bridesmaid and um, thinking, oh no, I'm going to have to put on a dress. And I don't even like, I may not even like the dress. And then I've got to walk down an aisle and you get, again, you start to believe you have to look a certain way to be respected, to be worthy, to be lovely. And so I hit a point where I started dieting and I didn't know it at the time, but I had the capacity to become obsessed with this. And to the point of, I had a dry erase board in my kitchen and I was constantly writing however many calories I'd had. I put myself on crazy diets. This was the late 90s. So the Atkins diet was very popular at that time.
Yep.
I can
Remember that.
remember, yeah, I can remember restricting my eating so much that I'd go out for a run. At one point, I was so faint, I had to just sit down on the sidewalk and call home for someone to come
Mhm.
pick me up because, I mean, talk about a lack of self care and a
Mm.
lack of listening to my
Yeah.
body. But it was so extreme. The restricting was so extreme. And then there was a point where I finally just snapped and rebounded. And again, I'm not aware this is happening at the time. I'm just living it
Yeah.
out. This is pre
Yeah.
counseling. And so then I began to notice a pattern in my life where I would begin to sneak food and I'd want to eat food in private. And then I would eat far more than I wanted to eat. And so I
Mm.
remember thinking, after this happened a number of times, I would think, why in the world are my behaviors contrary to my mind? My mind is
Mm.
saying, don't do that. You don't want to be doing that. That's too much. And yet I was just shoveling sweet. My thing was sweets, just shoveling brownies into my mouth. And then the night would just end with shame and regret. And I would climb into bed and cry myself to sleep and just hope for a better day. And I can remember in the height of those difficult days, thinking I always started out the day well, whatever well
Mhm.
meant back then to me. I wouldn't call it well
Right.
now. But just as the day went on and my emotions wore me down and I started going to the food, that was just sort of that was the way every day went. I tried to
Mm.
start out behaving. And so anyway, there
Yeah.
was a point where I knew something's not right here. I know this isn't anorexia. I know this isn't bulimia, just because I knew I wasn't doing some of the behaviors that are characteristic of anorexia and bulimia, but I thought something's
Yeah.
not right. And
Yeah.
this again was late 90s. So I mean, at that point, you had to pretty much go to work to get on the internet. I mean, most people had access to email when they
Yep.
went to their job, and you
Mhm.
couldn't look up, you couldn't Google anything back then. And so one night, this was a gift God gave me. I came into my house, and I write about this in my book. I came into my house and my roommate had some friends over, and someone left a book called The Harvard Guide to Women's Health on the dining room table in our
Wow.
room. And I thought, I'm going to quickly eat my dinner and then make myself scarce because they were having a gathering. And I thought, this is my chance to look up if I've got a legitimate problem here. And so I looked in that book and I found something called binge eating disorder. And I thought, oh, maybe that's what's going on here.
Mhm.
And the recommendation in the book was to see a professional and to see a therapist. And so
Yeah.
I took that step and started working with a therapist.
Wow.
And it was about a 7-year journey, which 7 is a significant number in the Bible, which I think
Yeah.
is really cool. When,
Mhm.
when I meet women and I tell them if you're really looking for the inside out heart transformation that I think leads to the change behavior,
Yeah.
you I believe you're probably looking at a multi-year journey.
Yep.
So that was the beginning, and I'll stop there and, see if you have any questions there, but that was the beginning of the journey of healing for me.
Yeah. It's I'm curious. I'll probably never know, but I'm curious how many people listening can relate to at least one part of that story, whether it's like fitting into a dress or going on those diets and then going on a different one and then whatever's the latest craze of the decade or the year. There's
Yes.
so many and they always change. And I personally definitely relate to the feeling faint. I remember restricting so horribly certain days in my college years where I could barely get out of bed.
Mhm.
And it was literally just because I needed food. It wasn't because I was sick or anything else was wrong with me. I just needed food. And
Right.
I didn't want to give that to myself because I'd binged the day before and thought I didn't deserve it. So
Mhm.
I think, yeah, just whatever that cycle looks like for people, it's it can feel so hard and so isolating. And I also just thought is so amazing, to bring that book to you in that moment and give you that opportunity to look up something. And then for you too to just have the desire and the capacity to just go and see that therapist or talk to someone because that's a huge step. I don't want to discount that. That's a huge step to say I need help and to actually get the help because I think some people are maybe in the point now where they're like I know I need help but I'm so scared to talk to
Right.
someone. And so
Right.
for you, do have a question like for you taking that step to see a professional, was that easy? Like, were you already in a point where you just said, I need something, I need someone? Or what was kind of your thought process when you were going to see someone and talk to them? Was it scary? How did you overcome that?
Yeah, I definitely think there was some fear around it. I can vividly remember sitting in the waiting room and filling out the form. And I was used to go, I mean, I think when you're in your 20s, for a lot of us, we don't go to the doctor a lot when we're that young. The older
True.
you get, the
True.
more you go, but
Yep.
hopefully, if you need it. But I remember there was a question on the form it was a Christian counselor, and there was a question on the form that said, "What is your view of God?"
Mm.
And I thought, I've never been asked that in a medical office setting. And I
No.
remember writing, I love him. I just love him. And I think there was there was an earnest desire in me at that time. I was a new Christian and I just wanted everything God had for me. And so again, like you said, that's a grace that I even had that desire. But
Definitely.
it took courage. I was able to go anonymously. I wouldn't say,
Okay.
even in retrospect, I'm not sure that anyone knew I was going at that point. And, you know,
Yeah.
to that end, I later learned the importance of community. But at that point, I went alone. It's safe, it's confidential. So I would say for the person afraid, just know that you don't have to tell the world about it to get
Mm.
started. And there,
True.
hopefully you end up with a safe person who can care well for you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love that you found a Christian counselor, and I would love to hear a little bit more about how your relationship with God or being a new Christian, how did that impact your desire to find healing?
Yeah, so like I said, I just become a Christian, just some years before this. And my realization when I became a Christian was I'd gone to church my whole life, and I thought being a Christian was about church attendance and church activity and about Sunday morning for 2 hours. And I was I got invited to, this part of my story. When I got to college, I had no plan to pursue faith. I thought, that's not really what people do in college, right? I'm going to put that on the
Yeah.
back burner. And, but God had other plans. There was an organization that was offering free pizza to come to one of their gatherings. I thought, well, gosh, I can't turn down free pizza. I love that. So
Mm-hmm.
again, God knew what he was doing to invite me in. And then you get to pizza, they're so nice. And they say, "Do you want to come back for Bible study?" And I came back to Bible study. And I really had this moment where I can look back now and say that was a Holy Spirit lifting the veil kind of moment where God just showed me he cared about me Monday through Saturday, all day. He loved me, he cared about me. This thing with him, this faith was not a religious activity. This was a relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that led me into God wants to help me with this problem because
Mm.
God cares about Monday through Saturday. And women will often tell me, "Oh, God probably doesn't care about this food thing. That's too small compared to, the war in Ukraine." But what I always tell people, and I want to make sure I say it early, the two good reasons I give for why God would want to help people with this issue is that, for one, the enemy is stealing your joy.
Mm.
You're going through your life. The Lord did not put you on this earth to sit around and think about your body. Excessively, to think about your weight. I mean, this is the enemy stealing your joy. Jesus said,
Yeah.
"I came that they would have life and have it to the full." So he doesn't want the enemy stealing our joy. Secondly, God wants intimacy with us. And for me, I went between making a God out of being thin to making a God out of the food to
Mm.
comfort me. The whole while, God is not my God. And so as I started to learn about, and I'll share here just in a minute what God began to show me, I realized God is the one who wants to comfort me. God wants to meet me in all these places that are hard, that are
Yeah.
pushing me toward the food. And so the intimacy with God is, again, another reason why I believed he would help me to come through this.
Yeah. Mm. That's that's powerful. It's just how you described, just the process and what God taught you about himself. Because I think sometimes we do get the character of God so wrong in how we approach him or how we think he's approaching us. And yeah, just the idea that something like food is so small for him and he wouldn't care, but he does. He cares so intimately about every single thing that we do, and it does. It steals our joy. And something I like to think is I feel like when the devil or the enemy is getting us so fixated on our bodies or food, it's also just a distraction from what God's really called us to do in on this earth. And that goes along with just having joy, because we should have joy for why God has us here, and how we can point people to him and just love him and serve him, and that is joyful. That should be joyful. So um
Yes.
no, I think you explained that so well. And I hope that anyone listening now, if you're just, struggling even with your relationship with God and how that can also work with maybe your struggle with food, that they can go hand in hand. And that's why I call this podcast Recover with God. Like
Yes.
literally, because even though I grew up a Christian since I was like 4 years old, I grew up in the church as well. And I felt like I had a relationship with God, but then once I fell into my struggle, I felt like I had to fix myself before I could go back to Him.
Hmm.
And so I think there's just so many lies about how we can approach God, or if He's going to listen to us, or if He's going to hear us, and just breaking those lies and breaking the chains and showing the freedom that's there is so important. So thank you for
Yes.
doing that.
Yes.
Um, and I'd love to hear more about how your story and your journey has now led you to help other women.
Yeah. So what happened along that 7 years? You mentioned the freedom thing. There were things that
Hmm.
God began to show me, and I learned them in different places. So one of the things was freedom. I think that was the biggest one, where I didn't realize that I believed I couldn't have certain foods. I believed certain foods were bad, can't have, shouldn't have foods. And I learned, Jesus said it's not what goes into you that makes you unclean, it's what comes out of your heart. And so that was one of the biggest steps for me, is to start practicing with my freedom that, I couldn't lose God's love. I couldn't lose my salvation through this. I had freedom with food. And so that began to change the way I viewed food. And then learning to follow my internal hunger and fullness cues. I never, ever thought about that until my 20s, late 20s. I ate according to someone's diet or the clock or, whatever. And then another thing I learned along the way was about my emotions. And I still laugh. I love telling the story. Someone pointed out, what would happen if you stayed in your room and you cried when you were sad instead of going to the kitchen? And I wanted to be like, well, what would happen if I stopped coming to you? Just it was so threatening to me to think, you're just going to stay in your room and be sad. I had not made that connection
Mm.
between my emotions and my eating. And
Yeah.
someone also pointed out, they're like, do you know what you're feeling when you want to eat but you're not hungry? And I was like, no, do you? As if someone outside of me would even have a clue what I was
Yeah.
personally feeling. So I had to get in touch with that. And then I ended up going to a 12-step program for overeaters and learned a lot through the scriptures, met with people in my church, had people lay hands on me and pray for me. There were all these different places I was pulling from to bring together this information and transformation. And I think the biggest, you asked about turning points. One of the biggest turning points for me was finally surrendering and realizing I know what I'm supposed to do. I know the problems that lead me to the food, but I cannot fix myself. And so realizing it's going to have to be the same power that brought Jesus back from the dead that I have access to bring me healing. And so as I learned these things in so many different places across many years, I began to have this thought of, gosh, if I ever get through this, I want to help other women. Because if I'm a Christian woman and I didn't know all these things, surely there are other women who don't know it either. So
Mhm.
fast forward, I did find healing. And in 2012, my father passed away. And it was one of those situations. I don't know if you've been with someone when they pass away, but you have this, I'm sitting in that hospital room, and just began to think like, oh my gosh, this ends, this life ends. And if there's something you believe that you are supposed to be about or that God's calling you to do, then you need to get going. You need to start
Yeah.
going to it. And I had a wonderful friend named Teresa who she said, Joy, I will help you start this group. And so I started a group. That's what Releasity was. And I invited 6 women into my home and just we met every other week. And I said, give me a week to recover from the teaching and then write the next lesson. Just got going with it. And then the next time I ran it was in a church setting, and I've run it online. And but I always had to be there. I had to be the person present to teach the class. And so
Yeah.
after a while, some women would say, I go home and I call my friend, and literally I'm in North Carolina, but someone told me about calling someone in California, someone in Alaska,
Wow.
and someone said she's wanting to know if she can FaceTime in for the course. And I'm very sensitive to, no, this is a closed, confidential place. And, we don't go over 12 per group. But I thought, gosh, I want to get it into a format so that anyone can access it.
Mm.
And so last fall, I didn't write last fall. This is a compilation. This book is Set Free and Satisfied, a grace-filled guide to stop overeating and start fully living. And so this is a way that I am able to currently help women. And you're talking about acronyms a minute ago. I love acronyms, alliteration.
Mm.
You were talking about alliteration. And so the course, Releasity, is based on an acronym for release. So it's 7 steps. And we walk through some of those pieces we talked about earlier about freedom, about expecting the Lord to heal and why we can expect the Lord to
Mm.
heal, and acknowledging our emotions, and following our hunger and things like that. So it's been exciting to run the course and to meet women and give them that safe place. My favorite thing, we've just started using the book in the course because the book came out last year. But prior to that, I used to stand at the front and do the teaching, but I think the bigger gift to the women is just to sit in a circle and listen to each other. And we do something called structured sharing, where women cannot interrupt each other. They can't refer back to what someone said, very much like a 12-step program, just giving them that safe space. And then now gives me a lot of joy and satisfaction to hear from readers, people who find it's on Amazon, and people who are in other states who say, I just found it on Amazon and I'm reading it with my friend. And so that has been a gift to be able to use my pain and what I learned to help other people.
Wow. It's amazing how God does take us through certain steps or certain things, and it's a process. And so, if you had started that course, when you were in year 2 of your journey, it wouldn't have the same impact because you hadn't learned all the things like the emotional side. And I think that's so important. I love that your course and what you help women do is touching on the emotions, because it's so true. And whether the emotions are leading you to eat something, or they're just things that just feel so uncomfortable or too much to bear, it's important to just address those and learn how to sit with them, because I think it's so easy for us to say, this emotion's uncomfortable. I don't want to sit with it. I need to let it, I need to get rid of it.
Right.
And God gives us emotions like as humans for a reason. Like they tell us things about
Yes.
ourselves and we can learn from them. So I love that you brought up that topic. And then just the power of community, like you said. And I think and this is just from personal experience and from what I've heard from other people share, and is that there's so much fear of judgment. I think
Hmm.
when you're going through, whether it's an eating disorder or disordered eating, or you just know that maybe you need to change something about your lifestyle, that if you share with someone, you're going to just be judged or they're not going to understand you. And to have that community where you're speaking or you're sharing with other women who are going through something very similar, that they're not going to judge you because they're in it too. and
That's right.
and 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 you don't have to feel alone, because that's the other piece I think, is where you people think, well, I'm the only one, or no one else is dealing with this, or everybody else's life just looks amazing on social media or even in person. We just aren't programmed to share as much.
Mhm.
Like, I know putting up those facades is just so common, and so I love that you're breaking those barriers too for women to have that safe space, and being very intentional about it to keep it to like 11 or 12 people, and making sure it's confidential, and that just gives so much, I'm sure, so much safety and peace to be able to truly speak the truth of what's going on in your life, as a woman part of the group. And so I love that you're doing that, and it's so exciting to see how it's growing out of what you started, where it was in your home and then in church and then now in other states and probably
Yeah.
other countries, I would
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah.
People are reading this and feeling that they're not alone. And yeah, love the alliteration of the title, Set Free and Satisfied.
Yeah.
Definitely
There you go.
uh spoke to me. And so it's just incredible to see how God can use your story. You stepped into that, like you said, with your father passing away, and just kind of that realization that we are here for such a bigger purpose beyond ourselves, and the time is now. The time
Hmm.
isn't like, well, maybe next year, or maybe, I'll think about it, but just
Right.
knowing, like, what can you do today, and what can you do to help other people. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate that you stepped into that calling and said yes to God, and how it's impacting other women now.
Yes.
And
And I was going to real quick, as we were talking about the emotions, you touched on that again. I think there's subtle messaging around emotions. We were talking a little bit ago about
yeah,
the lies and the lies that are very subtle, or the rules about eating that are subtle. And I
yeah,
thought the emotion messages are very subtle. You can sit in a group of people and hear different opinions from different people about what should be done with emotions.
yeah,
And women will often, I've heard a woman say, well, I was in a church once where they're like, do not listen to your emotions, because they're so afraid your emotions are going to control you. And I always say, well, let them inform you, but don't let them control. They don't determine
yeah,
they should not be the only determinant of your behavior, but at least, and that's why I use the term acknowledge them. So
yeah,
acknowledge the emotion. It's so helpful to just, if you're standing at the pantry and you don't mean to be there, you don't need to be there, just to go, what am I feeling? What am I doing over here? Am I stressed? Am I overwhelmed? Am I avoiding some task I don't want to do? Or I think
hmm
God gave them to us, and it's wise to
yeah.
let them inform us.
Get curious, right?
You're
I
curious. Exactly.
I think, any type of emotion, and something else for me, it's like anxiety. That doesn't lead me to food, but even still, any type of emotion that you're feeling in life, it's kind of like, well, what's causing this? What is the root of this fear? What is the root of this struggle in my mind? And just, yeah, having that conversation with God and asking the Holy Spirit to reveal to you what the deeper root cause is that you
Yes.
can then address. And so, yeah, emotions can be very helpful and not scary when we kind of take the power away from them. Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, glad you touched on that again. As I think it's just, yeah, it's such a great conversation to have. I feel like you could do a whole episode on just emotions.
Yeah.
Um, but for now, I would love for you to kind of thinking about the person listening right now who's been on a diet or diet after diet, and they have no success, and maybe they related to that part of your story. They're feeling frustrated right now, and they're just not sure what they're doing wrong. What would you say to that person?
I think the best thing to do is to be still, to at least pull aside from life, just go out in the yard, go somewhere by yourself for just a quiet 5 minutes, leave the phone
Mm,
behind, and let God speak to you. And that might sound really vague and impossible to someone right now hearing it, but I think just pouring out your heart to God and being quiet, I think, is so rare. We don't have these naturally built-in moments anymore to be quiet. I mean, even at the gas
mhm.
station, there's a screen entertaining you.
Yes.
All the dead spots we used to have, they're gone. So
Yep.
I believe you have to go make time to sit. And just this week in my reading of the Bible, I'm reading about where Jesus got up early in the morning and went out to a solitary place. And
Mm,
so whatever it takes to get to a solitary place, and set a timer for 5 minutes. I often do this with women, and they'll say, gosh, I didn't know that you could that you could uncover that much in 5 minutes. We're just not used to doing it. So I
yeah.
think being still, alone with God, um, trying to reach out to a safe friend if there's someone you trust, just so you're not carrying it by yourself. And then I always encourage counseling. If
Mm,
there's a possibility of seeing a counselor, highly recommend that conversation.
yeah. Yeah. Well, the 5 minutes thing, it's so true, to just put your phone down. And I have found, and I don't know if this helps anyone listening, for me, it's in the shower a lot of times because you're
Yes.
like, you can't have your phone in the shower. I mean,
Yes.
hopefully you're not taking your phone in the shower.
Yes.
But just having that time, and especially if it's from, like I don't wash my hair every day. So if it's a hair washing day, then you got
Yeah.
extra time in the shower, and you can really just like, I try to focus on God, and it's so easy for your mind to wander too, and give yourself a little bit of grace because God's always going to be there. But yeah, using those times when you're like, I really can't be distracted, or like in the car, I've tried to not turn, it's great to turn on the radio and listen to Christian music, but sometimes
Mhm.
I feel the Holy Spirit saying like, you don't need music right now, you just need me.
Yeah.
And like, here's some quiet time. Like it's like maybe you're 5 minutes in the car, but that's time to talk to God.
Yeah.
And not to say you can never listen to music in the car or talk to someone in the car, but
Right.
if you feel like you're lacking that connection, then that could be a time. So few practical other moments of when I know for me it's worked. So I think
Yeah. And I
that's
think
great advice.
Yeah, and I was praying before we started this recording, and the word that came to me was behold.
Ooh,
And I think you see in the scripture, behold the lamb who takes away the sin of the world. And, this idea of be still and behold. And if someone feels like they've got to be doing something, I always say, bring a piece of paper and write your prayer and then just sit and listen and see what comes. It might be scripture that you hear or a phrase that you hear or it's just an image. Prior to right at the beginning of my healing journey, I remember taking a walk by myself. It was Thanksgiving weekend. Everyone had left to go home, and I had stayed in DC. I was living in DC at the time. And I came back from a walk and just sat on my couch. One of these moments of I'm just going to sit here for 5 minutes and do nothing. And I began to have this picture pop up in my head of essentially people carrying old furniture out of an attic. It was like a dusty attic, and people are
yeah.
carrying things out. I thought that's strange. And but it definitely came to me spontaneously out of nowhere. And over the years, I began to realize, like, oh, God has been carrying things out from the past.
Oh,
We're going to
wow.
bring this stuff out and look at it because
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people who struggle with the overeating, there are challenges or wounds that have happened in the past that are still
Hmm.
pushing them to the food. And I will often say, you might be eating over someone who's not even alive anymore and things from your past. And so just I would encourage people to be still, behold, if you have to be writing,
Yeah.
write it down. So take time to pause.
Yeah.
It'll be
Yeah, we
helpful.
all need more of that in our day, you know.
Yeah.
It's so easy to just go, go, go. And then at the end of the night, you think, well, that's my time with God. And then you want to fall asleep.
You're
So,
so tired. I know.
and then you start again. And so having those
Yeah.
those just thinking more intentionally about inserting those times and not feeling guilty that it's like 5 minutes. I think sometimes too, as Christians, we feel like, oh, if I don't wake up and I don't do a whole like 30 minutes or an hour of devotional time with God, like I'm not a good Christian. And so, well, what's the point? I'm just not going to do anything because I can't commit to that. Just
Exactly.
start small. God is just asking for your heart, and you can build up to more if that's something that, God's leading you to, but
Yeah.
start small, and that's enough for today.
Yes, and I
Yeah.
think just neurologically, we're so overstimulated in this culture. I
Yep.
I just noticed that 5 minutes of quiet can just calm down the brain. I think about water that's rushing, and there are all these things. That I think just let myself settle down to as if it were a body of water that needed
Mm.
to still to let all the sediments fall to the bottom. Just I just think give God 5 minutes every so often, or just be still just a few minutes, like you're saying. I love that you
Yeah,
point out that we have these really ambitious goals, but
we do.
they're not realistic. So,
No, most of the
they're not
time.
realistic. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, and it can change by the day. Some days you might have 30 minutes and some days you might not. And so it's just going to be what you have for that day. And I love how you pointed out that Jesus did that.
Mm.
He is our ultimate model in life, and a lot of the things that God asks us to do, Jesus did on this earth. And so Jesus even needed time alone with God. He's the Son of God and he needed that too. So if he needed it, we definitely do.
Yes.
And so I think that's just the best example there. Um so why do you believe that it is important to like connect with God and other women to find true freedom?
Yeah, I think just going back to that point of if we could solve this ourselves, we wouldn't need self-help books.
True.
So, the whole section's called self-help, but we're there because we can't fix ourselves.
Yeah.
So going to God for that power, that insight, that guidance, I can watch in myself and other women that I've worked with the transformation from the inside out, where their desires really changed and their behavior followed the changed desires. And so I'll
Mhm.
say to women, wouldn't you rather get to the point where you don't even want to eat in that disordered kind of way where God has changed your desires, as opposed to my whole life, I'm just going to always be struggling against what I really desire. And so it gives me a lot of joy when I talk to women who are saying, I don't even want that anymore. I don't want that old way. And
Yeah.
so I think that transformation that starts from the inside comes from God. And then in terms of meeting with other women, that was a huge gift to me in my healing process. I had a good friend who was a therapist, not my therapist, but she said, Joy, I have a client who's struggling with the same thing you are. Would you be open to me introducing the two of you? And so this woman was such a gift to me. We go to these support groups together, and then we go out and talk about it afterwards. And it was so nice to process what I was learning in those support groups. It may or may not have been about God, but with a friend who did talk about God, it was huge for me to be able to share that with that friend. And like you were saying earlier, it takes away the judgment. I think another gift of talking with friends is often you'll hear someone else say something and they'll put it into words, and you'll say, oh my gosh, that's exactly my experience, but I never would have thought to articulate it that way, or I couldn't have articulated it that way. So, and I also think, I'll be really honest, at least in this, I've met a lot of fun women. I mean, we laugh a lot, we cry, we have a wonderful friendship. And what's fun, I don't know if it's fun, but it's almost like our little secret. It's like people don't know why we're so close
Mm.
because we're in these confidential circles. And they're like, how do you know Jenny? And I'm like, oh, you're never going to know why Jenny and
Yeah.
I first met, you know? So,
We just
but it's just, I just think that relationship is so sweet. And to be able to text each other, if you can say, I'm going into this weekend retreat. I know there's going to be food everywhere. I know there are going to be times where I don't feel like I'm connecting with anyone. Will you please cover me in prayer this weekend? And
yeah.
that support from a friend is huge. And
Yep.
it's again, at the end of the weekend, you're just amazed, like, wow, I can't believe it. Again, I didn't even want it. Or when I did want it, it wasn't available. Or you know what I mean?
Hmm.
I think just the
Yeah.
support, the companionship, the language you can help each other have around this is huge.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of accountability too, in a really healthy way where, you're just encouraging each other to take, steps, whether it's big or small, but just to know that you're not doing it alone and you've got
Right.
someone you can talk to and someone who like if you do maybe have a back step or a misstep you can talk about that too with the person and not feel judged and just know that you've got it fun. I love that because I think part of any type of recovery too is probably know going into it it's gonna be challenging and it might feel so scary and it might feel like, oh, this next stage of my life is just gonna be miserable. But to have people you can go through it with who can bring the joy and you can actually be laughing and having these really happy special moments in the midst of doing something really challenging, that's so important too. I think that you don't have to feel like, okay, if I'm choosing recovery or if I'm choosing to find healing, that oh, the next couple years of my life are just going to be horrible. It's
Right.
not true. You can still keep living while you're healing and recovering. So I think
Yeah.
that's just a great example of what that looks like in real life.
Yeah. And you were talking earlier about the judgment. I think when someone else shows up for us and shows us love, it helps us to know we're worthy of love. We really are. Everybody uses that phrase, be the hands and feet of Jesus. But I think when we show up for someone else and we're validating them,
Mm.
and so you help someone to not, there's so much shame and self loathing around this. I've
Yeah.
experienced and observed. And so I think it's just a message that you are loved, you are lovable, you are worth showing up for when we meet together.
It is a way of showing Jesus in that too. A verse that came to my mind, I was praying before our conversation too, and I thought of the verse where two or more are gathered together, God is there,
Mhm.
in Matthew, and it just really made me think because knowing that we were going to be talking about community and groups and just thinking through like God designed us for that. He wants to show us like if you're with other Christian women, I'm here with you too.
Yes.
You're not alone. So
Yes.
so yeah, that's just so cool how God works and how he kind of designed us for that. I love talking practical steps and tips, and I think you've given so many already. But what is maybe one practical step a listener can take to stop obsessing about their body and food like today? Something they could do.
The thing that comes to mind for me, we talked briefly about it, is being curious and not
Mhm.
critical. As far as not obsessing over it, that's a slightly different angle from this, but um, the importance of being curious and not critical toward themselves. I tell women, please don't say anything negative about your body out loud because you're constantly hearing these messages. And I say, unless you're confessing a sin or talking about something you're hoping to improve, you're not helping yourself at all to just keep beating yourself up verbally. And so I'll ask people, don't say anything negative about yourself out loud. And then in these moments when you want to eat, but you know it's not about physical hunger or nourishment, being curious. The therapist once taught me to be curious, not critical,
Mm.
to ask yourself, what is this about? So, and I also have a resource on my website, which we'll get to in a minute, but of happy new habits. There are 9
Oh,
different categories of ways to switch off to something else. So things God made us for that are life-giving, like nature, the arts, serving, friendship, different categories to replace this repetitive thinking and obsession. So that's a resource people could use for some ideas of shifting away from the obsessive thinking.
yeah, changing that mindset is, just kind of just changing what's on your mind sometimes, and yeah, focusing on something else, focusing on what Philippians tells us is, focusing on what's true and real and just positive in general. That's really what God calls us to do in any situation. So especially in this situation. And even just going back to what you said about speaking, not speaking negative words to yourself, just I forget the reference, but I think it's in Proverbs where it talks about how kind words are healthy to our bodies.
Hmm.
And that doesn't just mean kind words from a stranger or from a friend. That can be speaking kind words to yourself as
Yeah.
well. And so I think God just gives us all these little nuggets in the Bible of what health looks like. And it may not be what the world's telling us, but kind words can be healthy for
Right.
you and just help you to take steps. And yeah, stopping obsession is not going to happen overnight. It definitely isn't.
Right.
But the more you can these things into practice, it can become more like a reflex.
Yeah.
When you do have those moments where you feel this negativity coming on, or you feel the obsession, and then knowing, no, I can flip this around, and here
Hmm.
are some things I can do, and it starts to get easier as you keep doing it. So
Yeah. And I think
yes,
that points to the importance of patience. You know,
ooh, yeah,
so
for sure.
impatient, want this thing
Yes,
done. And um, yeah, it's hard being patient with
so
the
hard.
process.
It is. We want to just be healed and understandably, like tomorrow we want it to look different, but then I think sometimes that sets us up for failure when we think that's the expectation that
Yeah.
once I choose to heal, that I have to do it in one day.
Hmm.
And that's not even what God, like that's it's not, I mean, not to say God can't heal and that could be a true miracle, but most of the time it's going to take patience, like you said, and
Yeah.
much progress and maybe even 7 years.
Yeah, and
And
there's fruit from that process. There's the fruit of the
definitely.
friendships. There's the wisdom you gain that you can help other people with. I think if it happened overnight, I don't know how much wisdom you have to offer others.
That's true.
So
Yeah.
it's a gift. There's fruit
Mhm.
from having to be patient through the process.
Yeah, sort of like suffering produces, the endurance, and then the endurance eventually it produces that hope, and then you can pass the hope on to other
Yes.
people. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
God designed it that way.
Yeah.
Um, I've I feel like you've touched on so many practical tips and great examples of what this journey can look like for anyone struggling right now. Do you have any final thoughts that maybe we didn't touch on that you'd like to cover?
Yeah, I think the final thoughts are just a reminder to anyone listening that God loves you and he wants to help you and he wants to be
Mm,
close to you. And you're not going to hear that message out in the world. So
mm.
um, I'm here, I'm happy to share it here. And I don't know if this is where you want me to share about my resources or will that
Yes.
be coming? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd love for
So
you to tell people how they can connect with you.
yeah, so I'm on Facebook and Instagram. Releasity is spelled Releasity. And that's my handle there. I have a website, joymast.com. And then you can learn more about the book on my website, but you can also just go to Amazon for the book, Set Free and Satisfied, a grace-filled guide to stop overeating and start fully living. And then there are some articles on my blog, which I'll begin adding more to this fall. And my hope is just that people will get the book and start reading it with friends. I say that early on
Mm.
in the book. Find a friend. I think you'll get far more out of it if you can talk about it with someone. So anyway, I encourage anyone interested to get a copy of it, find a friend, and continue the process or start the journey of finding healing.
Yeah, I love you have so much for everyone, whether that's like, okay, maybe today someone can just follow you on Instagram or Facebook
Mhm.
and then, get ready, get the book, find a friend to read the book with, and maybe just who knows, you could have a friend that you have no idea is actually going through something very similar to you, and that could be a bridge to just deepen that friendship. Because I think even sometimes with even friends or family, like you don't necessarily know what someone else is going through or what they're struggling with, and we need to break those chains. So I will link everything in the show notes, your social media, website, the book, and the core, all of that information will be there. And I really do hope that if you're listening now and you're struggling with overeating or just the yo-yo dieting, the restriction, the binge, whatever that looks like for you, you will seek out help and start with Joy's website and her tips and tools here that you heard a little bit about today. So thank you so much, Joy. I love your heart for helping women, and I just know the Holy Spirit was all over this conversation. I really felt it, and I just know it's going to speak to people out there who just want to find freedom and they're just not really sure how to start.
Yes, thank you, Jayme. This is a huge gift you're giving the world to
Well,
make this available to people, your podcast. So thank you so much for having me.
yeah, of course. Appreciate you right there.
Hey there, it's Jayme again, and you made it to the end of this episode of the Recover with God podcast. I pray that God is speaking to your heart right now and that you go on with your day feeling less alone. If you haven't already, I hope you hit that follow button to subscribe and receive notifications for future episodes. And did you know that if you leave a quick rating or review, you can help more people find this podcast too? God designed us for community, so follow along and help others do the same to feel less alone together. I hope you tune in next time, and until then, you can always catch up on any past podcasts you might have missed. P.S. I'm cheering for you.